Alors, bonsoir, good morning, good evening. I'm sorry, good evening and good afternoon to all who are joining us today. Thank you for attending the Canadian Academy of Engineering Building Gender Inclusive Workplaces webinar today. I would like to thank the National Engineering Month for partnering with us today. My name is Yves Beauchamp. I'm the president of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from McGill University, which is situated on the traditional territory of Kanyen-Kehaka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchanges among nations. We recognize and respect the Kanyen-Kehaka as a traditional custodian of the lands and waters on which we meet today. For the many of you joining from outside McGill campus, I wish to respectfully acknowledge the traditional territories of First People on which we gather today. For the benefit of those who may not be familiar with our organization, the Canadian Academy of Engineering, it is one of the national institutes through which Canada's most distinguished and experienced engineer provides strategic advice on matters of critical importance to Canada. The Academy is an independent, self-governing, and not-for-profit organization established in 1987, the year the Canadian engineering profession officially celebrated its first 100 years of existence, and is one of the three national academies that make up the Council of Canadian Academies. We have over 850 fellows from across Canada, all of whom have made significant contribution to engineering in Canada in the private, public, and academic sectors. I must mention now, starting the webinar, that the view and opinions being expressed here are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the official policy and position of the Academy. I know that by now, all of us are, I'm sure, pretty familiar with Zoom, Teams, and all the other tools that allow us to meet from anywhere on the planet. During today's webinar, we ask you to keep your mic muted and also to use the chat function for your questions. We will do our best to answer as many of your questions possible today. For your information, this session is being recorded and will be available on the Canadian Academy Engineering website. Now today, our moderator today is Liana Ma. Liana holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering and a master degree in environmental engineering, both from UBC. She has spent her career in consulting. She started her career as a design engineer and project manager on a wide range of wastewater, water, and civil engineering projects across Canada and in the Caribbean. Currently, she is Vice President of Business Development and a member of the Board of Directors for the Associated Engineering Group of Companies, a consulting company with over 1,000 staff across Canada. Liana served on Council and as President from 2019 to 2020 of Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia, the regulating body for BC 38,000 engineers and geoscientists. Liana is very passionate about promoting diversity and inclusion and their benefit to fostering respectful and creative workplace and innovative project solutions. She has participated in diversity initiatives at the local and national level. In 2016, Engineer Canada presented Liana with the award for the support of women in the engineering profession. In 2020, Liana received the UBC Faculty of Applied Science Dean's Medal of Distinction for her contribution to promote the advance of the faculty. And in 2021, she was recognized by Business in Vancouver magazine as one of the BC 500 most influential leaders. I will pass now the floor at this stage to Liana, and I wish you a great webinar. Thank you so much and enjoy the time.
Thank you, Yves. Merci beaucoup. And thanks also to the Canadian Academy of Engineering for inviting me to be your moderator for this panel discussion on building gender-inclusive workplaces. Welcome to all our attendees from across the country. It's nice to see some familiar names. I wish I could see your faces, but hopefully soon we can get together in person. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that today I'm joining you from my home in Burnaby, BC, which is on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, which are the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. I'd like to extend my appreciation to the Indigenous peoples of this land and the opportunity to live, work, and raise my family on these territories. Today, we have three exceptional panelists who will provide insights and perspectives on how we can build more gender-inclusive workplaces. We'll discuss a range of topics, and then after, we'll take some questions during the discussion period. As Eve mentioned earlier, please do enter your questions into the chat. We'll probably take some questions during the discussion and then as well following the discussion or following the panel discussion. I would like to ask all our attendees to make sure that your questions and comments are respectful to our panelists and all our attendees. I'd now like to introduce our three panelists, starting with Professor Elizabeth Croft. Elizabeth is the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at Monash University, where she oversees over 9,000 students and 600 staff. At Monash, she established new degrees in robotics and in biomedical engineering and introduced the cooperative education internship as well as the industrial doctoral programs. Recently, Elizabeth was appointed Vice President, Academic and Provost at the University of Victoria in BC, and she'll be commencing there on July 1st. So it'll be nice to have you home, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is originally from Canada. She completed her undergraduate degree at UBC, her master's degree at Waterloo, and her PhD at the University of Toronto, all in mechanical engineering. Elizabeth is recognized internationally as an expert in human robotic interactions. She is chair of the Australian Group of 8 Engineering Deans Council, an elected executive member of the Global Engineering Deans Council, and a member of the Canadian Academy of Engineering International Committee. Throughout her career, Elizabeth has actively developed and promoted strategies for increasing the participation of women in engineering. As NSERC Chair for Women in Science and Engineering at UBC, admissions of women into the engineering degree program increased from about 18% to 30%. Moreover, in her leadership roles, she has implemented strategies and policies to address gender bias, including balanced shortlists, which has seen the number of women academics hires increase to 50%, and the membership of organizational boards and councils increased to 40%. Her contributions have earned her considerable acclaim, including the Women's Executive Network's Top 100 Most Powerful Women in Canada, which she received in 2014, as well as Engineers and Geoscientists BC highest honor, the R.A. McLaughlin Memorial Award, which she received in 2018. Elizabeth is also a fellow of Engineers Canada and the Canadian Academy of Engineering. Elizabeth, we're so pleased you can join us today from Melbourne, Australia. Next, I'd like to introduce Marg Latham. Marg is a professional engineer, certified management consultant, and the president of Acra Libra Consulting Limited, a management consulting firm. Marg was the only woman to graduate in her civil engineering class from Queen's University in 1974. Since then, Marg has continued to be a pioneer and a trailblazer. As a woman in construction engineering, Marg managed the building of major institutional, residential, and infrastructure projects in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. She then went on to hold executive roles with major Canadian and multinational consultancies as vice president with consulting firms UMA and AECOM, where she implemented management systems to improve client delivery. Since starting her business in 2010, Mark has helped public and private engineering organizations to improve professional practice and quality management. For 5 decades, Mark has also been a champion for women in engineering and construction across Canada. She's currently chair of the Canadian Centre for Women in Science, Engineering, Trades, and Technology, also known as WINSET. WINSET is an organization committed to fostering opportunities for women to enter, stay, grow, and lead at all levels in science, engineering, trades, and technology. In 2021, Mark received Engineers and Geoscientists BC's highest honor, the R.A. McLaughlin Memorial Award, recognizing her technical, professional, and community work. Thank you, Mark, for joining the panel today. Our third panelist is Brent Smith, who's Manager of Operational Readiness, Advanced Reactor Development at New Brunswick Power Corporation. Brent is a mechanical engineering grad from the University of New Brunswick. He's a professional engineer in New Brunswick and has over 30 years of experience. Brent has had several careers with New Brunswick Power Corp, starting in engineering and construction before moving into the nuclear division. He has over 27 years of experience in nuclear power at an operating CANDU 6 facility, including leadership roles in engineering, reactor inspections, fuel handling, maintenance, refurbishment, nuclear oversight and quality assurance, and now in advanced reactor development. Brent participates in many industry associations, forums, and peer groups, such as the Canadian Standards Associations, which you might know as CSA, as well as CANDU Owners Group and the Electric Power Research Institute. Professionally, Brent is past president of Engineers and Geoscientists New Brunswick and a past president of Engineers Canada. Brent also holds fellowships with Engineers Canada, the Canadian Academy of Engineering, and the Canadian Society of Seniors Engineers. In May 2022, Brent will begin a term as president of the Canadian Society of Senior Engineers. Welcome, Brent, and thank you for participating on this panel.
Thank you.
Now for the first question, to kick things off, I'd like to ask our panelists to take a minute to tell us why diversity is important to them. Elizabeth, can I ask you to start? Why is diversity important to you?
Absolutely, and thank you, Leanna. I would also begin, though, by acknowledging the people of the Kulin Nations on the land that I stand and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and pay my respects to the elders of the lands in which we are each located. So I am an engineer, and I think that as engineers, we are problem solvers, and I think my commitment to diversity is really about solving the challenges that we're all facing, not only from my own experience, but from the experience of many women that I've worked through. And one of the things I see is that it should be based on evidence. The evidence is clear about the importance of diversity. We know that diverse groups perform better. And engineering itself is about making things better, making it safer, things more efficient, more sustainable, higher yielding, and higher return. So in a profession that is devoted to improvement, no matter where you look, whether it's lab studies or field studies, the results show that diverse groups, through diversity in gender, ethnicity, sexuality, and backgrounds, give us better results, help us to solve the problems better, because people work better when they are in diverse groups. And it has been actually just a privilege to champion some incredible improvements in gender diversity throughout my career. And I have seen how much it has made a difference, how much better it has made the workplace for everybody. And that is why it is something that I believe in passionately and intellectually, and something that I know is within reach for our profession.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Mark, can I ask you, why is diversity important to you?
Well, as you mentioned, Leanna, I came out of school in 1974 and I was the only woman in my class. And although that may have been a little idyllic at university, getting out into the workplace, I suddenly realized that I was alone. I was isolated where I was working. There were no other women. I also saw that the women in other disciplines that I graduated with very quickly, they left the profession. They'd gotten that degree, worked hard to get it, and then decided that they weren't welcome where they were working, and they went on to other things, whether that was business or law or other professions that seemed more welcoming to them. So I started out not really understanding all the concepts that Elizabeth has spoken about, but really just feeling that there's a need to get more women. I joined a group. I found other women who were working in construction, albeit not in the field like I was. It gave me a connection. We started to go out to career days and panels and help other women. And so it progressively grew into not just doing it for myself to reduce that isolation, but starting to understand that as an industry, as a profession, the industry can't be all it can be if it's only tapping half the population. And so for 5 decades, sometimes frustratingly so, I've been working towards advancing more women in engineering.
Thank you, Mark. Brent, can you tell us why diversity is important to you in your work?
Certainly. So I probably, most people tuning in don't fit the mold of being the person you would expect to find on a diversity panel, but it is important to me. I am a son, a brother, and a father, and of women. And although my daughter was close to entering engineering, not quite, but I do find it's important, and especially in our workplace. Back when I was on the board of Engineers Canada, we had developed the 30 by 30 initiative, which is now widely known on their website and through policy. I think has already been mentioned. I believe diversity means reflecting our society, and in engineering, that means we want the best minds in the profession. We just don't want anybody that fits a certain mold. We want to reflect society. So I think it's important that way. I think it's important in the workplace because we get the best solutions with a diverse thought and background of people that are in the workplace. And to me, you get different perspectives, and for as an engineer to get the best solution, which is what we're about. I believe that you need that diversity, and it's important. And anytime we can have these conversations, it helps move us forward as a society. So that's my interest and why I'm here.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you, Marg and Elizabeth, for sharing your perspectives on diversity. The first topic that we'd like to talk about today is improving equity, diversity, and inclusion in our workplaces. And I thought we'd frame that discussion in the context of the Great Resignation. Some of you may have heard of the Great Resignation. I know we have some students on the line who might not have heard the term Great Resignation, but what we started to see in 2021 carrying on through to 2022 is a tide of employees leaving their workplaces as opportunities started to increase with pandemic restrictions lifting. What we saw in 2020 during the pandemic is because of the uncertainty brought on by COVID-19 that workers didn't resign. So the rate of resignation slowed as workers held on to their jobs. In 2021, continuing to this year, some of that uncertainty abated. So what we're seeing now is a record number of workers leaving their jobs, which is now the Great Resignation. What we've read and I recently read an article from Harvard Business Review that says the Great Resignation provides companies with opportunities. And what this particular paper says, that companies that have a vision and the resources to offer flexibility to their employees are the most likely to maintain a stable and competitive workforce. And the companies best able to attract and retain talent will be those offering benefits that address the changing needs of workers. So in this context, Mark, can you start us off and tell us, what do you think are the opportunities that the Great Resignation offers for companies to evaluate their workplace, their culture, their diversity, and improve equity, diversity, and inclusion?
I see it as kind of a sort of a two-pronged approach. I mean, one, if people are leaving and they are leaving in droves from your organization, don't make assumptions about why that's happening. Investigate why it's happening. I know it's easy to say they're leaving for more money, but it's an opportunity to find out what else is going on there. And is there something you can change to make your workplace culture more respectful, inclusive, valuing diverse workforce and valuing gender? And so if on that side of it, I think it's worth an organization sort of looking inward. As far as the other side of it, how do you use it to change the diversity of your workplace by attracting new employees and making sure that that's a diverse set of employees? I think it's important to look at all the ways that you go about looking at your recruiting and what you say about the positions. I've certainly had the opportunity to learn a lot over the last few years as chair of WINSET around things like the words that you put in your recruitment. There are a lot of words that, the guys just go, wow, that sounds like the job for me. And women look at it and say, well, they're not focused on me. And so it's really important to educate yourself about how you go about recruiting and to make sure that you we all have unconscious bias in how we view those that come into our offices for interviews. There's things that are built and wired into our brains. So it's important to bring those to the surface and understand them, so you're not using them to judge the person who may be a great employee but comes from a diverse or different background than you. So I think there's the two opportunities: look at your workplace culture and look at how you go about attracting people to your organization.
Thanks, Mark. Brent, can you tell us your experiences with the Great Resignation, if you've seen it, and what do you think that are the opportunities there for companies to improve their culture and diversity? Oh, Brent, you're still on mute.
I guess I got caught with the pandemic, the other pandemic side of things, just being on mute. I think you mentioned the pandemic, and I think what it did was force a lot of large organizations like mine into flexibility. And what I mean is, before we were a bit reticent to offer that. It was outside of the quote unquote norm, so it was hard to do that. But what it did was forced us into doing that. And I think a lot of people became more productive, and we saw it. I saw it in terms of having that flexibility, being able to think outside the normal hours and put some real thoughts down into what it is that we were working on. So I think that's important because we have developed a policy, and I'm sure others have, on sustaining that. And I think it's important to work it out. Not every situation is the same, so it needs to be tailor-made to the individual. And I think that's important to have that flexibility. I think in large part what we're seeing also is because of this shift around, people are finding they want to work at things that drive them, that they're passionate about. So in our case, in the advanced reactor world, we are starting to hire on new engineers, or not new, but new to us, experienced engineers from different fields. And through a campaign, or our hiring campaign, it's interesting. We have one coming from Turkey, one from Australia, one from out west, and two that were local to New Brunswick. So and a diverse mix, not just culturally, but in gender as well. So that to me says that people are moving because they want to move. They want to find something different. They want to make a difference. And if you have that flexible work environment, I think it provides them that opportunity to flourish.
Thank you, Brent. It's good to see that you're already seeing the positive influences and impacts of having flexibility in the workplace to attracting a diverse workforce. Thank you for sharing that experience. Elizabeth, can you share with us what are you seeing as far as changes, or what you think are the opportunities there are for organizations to improve their culture and improve equity, diversity, and inclusion as a result of the Great Resignation?
Well, certainly what we're seeing in Australia is just a massive demand for engineering talent. And one of the things that happened, I'm in lockdown. I was in lockdown land, not only Melbourne, which was the most locked down city, but in Australia, which closed its borders to immigration for 2 years. And we had been importing a great deal of our engineering workforce from overseas, and suddenly that was shut off. And employers are still really struggling right now as governments invest in engineering projects to try and find talent to come and work on these projects. And I think one of the things that they're recognizing is that they need to draw from a broader pool, and that 50% of the people on the planet being women means that that is a pool that you need to draw from. So they're really starting to think about, well, how do we attract and retain women in our workforce? And there have been many surveys, and even a recent one that shows that the top factor for women is work-life balance. And it's actually the second top factor for attracting men. So hello, workplaces that are loud and proud about offering flexibility in your workforce and what in your work life is really important. And of course, this pandemic has showed us that it is completely possible. Throughout this time, we had hundreds of days where we were all working from home, at least here in Melbourne, and not allowed to go more than 5K from our house. And we were still running, a full engineering program in my faculty, and working out how we could do that, as well as supporting the effort in Australia to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So I know we've all had that experience, and we absolutely, like Brent said, need to capture that, need to see how we can make that a new opportunity, a new norm, a new benefit. And we need to have that leadership from the top. It needs to be more than just tolerated. It needs to be culture, as Mark said. It needs to be policy. It needs to be championed the way that we can make flexible work, which actually engages people much more in their workplace, an opportunity to attract more people to our workplaces.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And certainly your discussion on policies, flexible work arrangements, Brent echoed a lot of that. That's a good segue to our next topic, which is workplace policies. And you talked about some of this becoming policy. Does it need to be a policy, and what policies have to be established, whether it be for recruitment or retention, to build a gender inclusive workplace? And to that extent, what successful policies have you seen in your workplace, and how have you implemented these successfully? Maybe Brent, said you started the conversation on changes to your operation. Maybe you can tell us about your flexible workplace policies and other policies that you might have that will help to build a gender inclusive workplace.
Sure. So we don't, other than the flexible work policy, there's been no conscious policy for hiring that, that the example I gave before, it worked out. And it was, the best candidates and from a varying field of things. So you can have policies, and I think most of us that work in industrial environments know you can have a safety policy, but it's only as good as the leadership that executes it or sets the example, right? So, you need to have that senior leadership on board to be part and leading those thoughts and actions towards equity, diversity, and inclusion. Managers need to be bought in. They need to understand the differences. Inclusion is a leadership trait. So when you think of great leaders, they include people in their decisions or in their team. So I think that's part of it. Understanding some of the barriers for some people on your team and make those changes. But overall, not policy, I think really you've got to set a strategy. So what is it you want to achieve? How do you plan that, and how do you measure it? Because what gets measured is what gets done. So if you don't have that measured, then it'll be hard, and that's got to be built into recruitment, and just as importantly in organization succession. So I think we'll talk on that a little bit later, but the succession planning has to be within that too. So, and providing network groups and partnerships for things in the workplace. So as much as policies can be created, I think it's more the culture. I think it's more what you demonstrate. We always say at work that it's the shadow of the leader. So if you lead and show that example, then I think others will follow.
And I'm glad you spoke to strategies and metrics as part of the policies. Is that something that you've developed at your workplace to help improve the success of diversity policies?
So we have not developed any measurements, let's say. We do have policies in place. They're very high level, though. I mean, they're not a detailed procedure type thing, but I would say it's not conscious with most people about the numbers. There's no metrics that are telling us how successful it is. It wasn't until this recent example I talked about earlier about hiring just for our new initiative that I sat back and said, wow, this is kind of neat, and there's more to come. So some of the people that we're working with, some of the vendors and their technologies, the diversity that they've built into their teams is similar. They have similar experiences. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say the metrics aren't really developed from a personal perspective. But
yeah, but something to work towards. Yeah. Thanks, Brent. Elizabeth, can you speak to the development of policies and strategies, as well as any metrics that you might have developed? I know in your bio, we heard that you implemented balanced shortlists, which saw the number of women academics hires increase to 50%. So maybe you can speak to the policy, strategies, and metrics in that context.
Okay, so maybe I'll start with metrics, and I'm just going to share our Athena Swan plan for the university. So Athena Swan we have Athena Swan Bronze recognition. It is an international standard. It's only granted when an organization provides evidence of their current diversity and inclusion, and it's assessed the barriers to greater equity and provides an action plan to address 5 of the identified barriers. So this is work where we are measuring and looking and measuring and then creating policy and showing our action plans. And I think we need all of those along with leadership from the top to be able to make substantive transformative change. So yeah, and it's really important to do this. If we doing the same thing and expecting a change is actually the definition of insanity. So you actually have to do different things. So what have we done differently in engineering? Well, the first thing is we really did measure and we report. So at every executive meeting in my faculty, we report on a different aspect of our diversity. So we report on the numbers of women academics at the different levels. We report on the number of women PhD students and postdocs. We report on the numbers of women on our advisory boards and on the number of women that are coming into our undergraduate program. And we discuss at every meeting that one of those aspects and put in place an action that we are going to take to address this as we drive towards balance in engineering, because we are absolutely committed. So it's coming from the top, it's engaging all the executive, and that is an thing that we're doing. The second thing we're doing is we are implementing the balanced shortlist policy because it has been incredibly effective. So in 2016, a team of researchers at Colorado looked into gender and shortlists and found that if there's only one woman on a shortlist, there is statistically no chance of her getting hired. So that is not good. So what we decided instead is that we would require on a short list that it needed to be balanced. So if you've got 4 or 5 people on your short list, at least 2 of those people need to be highly qualified, appointable women. So what does that mean? That means that search committees need to search. And I'm not the executive myself, I am not going to approve a short list until they have come to me, showing me that they have searched and that they have created a balanced shortlist. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And here's why. First of all, you're getting to see the very best because you are searching. Okay, that's wonderful. And people are very active. The search committee is very active in going and looking at for people. So the quality of the list, the engagement of the search committee increases. And then the second thing that I think is pretty wonderful is that, we are seeing that out of that balanced shortlist, 50% of the hires are women. So, it is yielding us the outcome that we wanted. And the people that won the search are the best people. So from the get-go, it just gives you a wonderful outcome. The other thing that we've done is we have required that our industry advisory committees are also balanced. We're seeing about, we are up to about 43% on our industry advisory committee. Again, wonderful outcome, because what it's required our units to do is go out and look for talent. Really think about how they would like to populate their advisory. It's just not just me and my buddies or my mates. It's actually people who are going to come in and provide input that's going to improve our research and our education and our interaction with community. So I think these are critical actions because it absolutely improves your organization. If you do not have policy, if you do not say that this is what you're going to do and commit to it, you're not going to do it. It has to have the backing of the top. So that would be my that's what I've lived, and I've seen it be very successful.
Elizabeth, that sounds so exciting. And to get to the numbers, to get to 50%, that is inspiring. So Elizabeth, you shared your policies on recruitment, and Brent, you've shared some policies with respect to flexible work options. Marg, are there other workplace policies that we should be looking to establish in order to build more inclusive workplaces?
I like the discussion so far, Leanna, that Brent has talked about having a vision and a strategy, and Elizabeth on the measurements, and that gets you there. And I don't believe in a one size fits all. So I don't think that there's necessarily, this is one policy that every organization has to put in place. The one thing I'm going to turn this around a little bit and talk about a concern about policies. You can put it on paper, you can communicate it's your policy, but what you do in practice is what really tells people what the policy is. And I tell this story, and I'd like to think it wouldn't happen today. It's, a couple of decades old, but there were some women who wanted to work part-time, young children. Company let them work part-time. One of the guys wanted to work part-time, and one of the managers said, well, he sure shot his career in the foot. Immediately, the policy about flexibility, being able to work part-time, that just really said, here's what we think of that policy. And I think there's a real risk if organizations just focus on, well, these are the policies we need for diversity in our workplace. It really needs to fit your organization. You really need to think about it. I agree with both Brent and Elizabeth. It's got to start at the top. If your CEO, your managers, your senior leaders, your mid-level managers, if they're not on board, if you haven't convinced them that there's, the burning platform or whatever your analogy is for it, for them to be on board with it, then it's not going to change. And that, that will be a waste of all that effort. And we know how often that can happen within an organization.
Absolutely agree, Marg. And both Elizabeth and Brent spoke to leaders needing to be champions. And in fact, Brent, you shared a story when we met last week about hiring a young female engineer and championing that person. And she's now a leader. And maybe you can share it with our audience, because I thought it was a great example about how managers and leaders need to be champions. So Brent, if you don't mind sharing that story, I think it would really inspire.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. If the example I think we were talking about, I had hired somebody who was given the opportunity, came in through a different angle, but met the requirements, and it was an opportunity, and turned out to be a fantastic employee, really engaging, and was identified within succession realm, and not under my leadership, but someone else's, was identified as potential successor, and has now become the first chief nuclear engineer in Canada. So that is an example where you can identify the talent and foster it and bring it through, and then when the appropriate time is there, then bring them in when you can and when they're ready. So that was an experience we've had just recently, within the last few months. So.
Thanks, Brent, for sharing that, and that's an example where I think diversity and meritocracy merge, and it's a bit of a segue to our next topic, which is diversity versus meritocracy. And there's been a lot of discussion and research done in this area. And just to provide our audience with a little bit of background, most companies use merit-based processes or meritocracy for recruitment, promotion, reward, and recognition. But research shows, and this includes research that Harvard has done, that Deloitte, a management firm, has done, that due to systemic and unconscious biases, merit-based processes decrease rather than increase diversity. And these same merit-based processes have sustained disparities in pay, in recognition, and advancement. Elizabeth spoke earlier about how research shows that diverse workforces and teams improve problem solving, decision making, and creativity. So the question, and maybe Elizabeth, I'd ask you to start, is meritocracy a myth? How can we attain a diverse workforce through a merit-based selection process?
Well, I've already spoken, and thanks for Leanna for the question. I've already spoken about the balanced shortlist policy that we've put in place and we've practiced, and we've, it's wonderful actually to see the entire, my entire organization take it on board. And in fact, now the finance department of the university has actually adopted it as well, because they see that part of having a great workforce, which is what you want, is diversity, and that diversity is a value that you want to bring in. So, what do we measure, right? And that comes back to your question about unconscious bias. Is someone meritorious because they look like me and they have the same experience as me, or is someone meritorious because they bring something different that I did not know about? And I would say the latter. I want to hire people that surprise me, who think differently, who challenge the way that I think. I think those people are the ones that actually bring more value, and especially in an organization where we are discussing ideas and we are challenging ideas and we're trying to come up with the best ones. We need not to have groupthink. We need diversity in experience, in background, in training, in all of those things to come up with solutions that serve our society. So one of the big pieces that we have done to address the challenges of implicit bias is starting with our executive, because it always starts from the top. We have had all of our executives do implicit bias training, ally training, a number of different sessions on diversity and inclusion, and we continue to refresh that, and then we move that out through the whole organization, and that is a requirement. In fact, we do not let people sit on hiring panels if they have not done that training, and that may hit professors where it hurts if they want to hire a postdoc. So it's really important, but the feedback has again been fantastic, because what I hear from people is, wow, I've learned a lot, and I've thought more about my hiring strategy, and that has brought me a much better group, a much better team. It has taken a little longer, but we got a better outcome. So I think this investment, because people are our biggest investment I think in any organization, but certainly in educational and research organizations and in engineering organizations. I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree that if we do not have fantastic people, we are at risk. So to me, we do have to get through our preconceived ideas. And they are preconceived, and it doesn't make us bad or wrong. It's just what our experience is of what an engineer looks like or what a leader looks like, and open our minds and open our opportunities to diversity. And so training and policy and leadership all lead to a change in that kind of mindset.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Some great ideas here with respect to training to reduce those unconscious as well as the systemic biases, and having a hiring panel. I think that's so important to bring different perspectives. Brent, maybe can you share some of the processes that you've seen or used to support diverse workforces, as well as maintaining that merit-based selection process? Still on mute, I see, Brett.
There we go. I think we can all appreciate that given the right level of culture and support, anyone can be successful. So I think based on that, we need to understand that exclusion exists. And, you know, I think in one of our previous discussions, we were talking about the you know, bias training. And we do offer that, and we do have that now in our leadership modules. And biases exist, and not just in equity and diversity and inclusion, but in a lot of things in terms of thinking when it comes to engineering. So it's important to understand that everybody has a natural bias. Inclusiveness means people can be themselves, right? So rather than fitting in. So if it's truly inclusive, then they can be themselves. And I think it's learning to appreciate that. I was once in a seminar when we talked about coaching and versus feedback. So feedback is to the action, whereas coaching is to the thinking. So what does the individual think? How do they think? What is the path where they develop their best thoughts? So it's understanding that, it's engaging those people, it's reimagining the model of what is possible. Education is a big part of that. You know, for those of us that may be blind to some of the exclusions that happen, or in the workplace, I think it's important because it gives everybody the chance to have that aha moment where they say, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way," and then build those networks to be able to share those ideas and truly seek to understand, I guess would be the best way I would describe it.
Thank you, Brent. Mark, can you share what are your perspectives on attaining a diverse workforce through a merit-based selection process?
I want to use a couple of examples of some research, or however you would put it, and I think they're ones that Elizabeth would certainly be very familiar with. And the one is about the same resume, same skill set. John gets more selections as the person to hire. The other one, and it kind of near and dear to my heart, because I have a niece who plays a saxophone, and it's the one about they weren't getting women, you know, because they were choosing on merit, they weren't getting women into the orchestra. So putting up the screen and then doing the auditions, you know, the people were just focused on what they were hearing, how the person played their music. I mean, that's what you're hiring for. And suddenly it got much closer to this 50-50 split. In fact, I'm sure Elizabeth would tell me it probably got more women than men out of it because the talent was there. And so anyone who says that they're really basing their decisions, their promotions on merit-based, I would question that, because they probably they're just not seeing that they have biases, that they're internal to them, that they're wired that way. I think everybody here certainly has an understanding of it, and even the women who believe very much in women, you know, being equal, we all have biases against women being equal, because we grew up in a world where most of the women, when we were children, they stayed at home. They didn't go out to work. They didn't have careers. And so suddenly we're in a world where that's different. And we have to think about the fact that we're wired. You say engineer, I think a man, you know, that kind of thing. And so I mean, anyone who says that they're basing their decisions on a merit-based system, chances are it can be exposed to show that that's not the case. They're really hiring in their own image because they think obviously they did well. That person who looks like them and acts like them will do well too.
Absolutely, and I appreciate what Mark, you and Elizabeth and Brent have shared about unconscious or implicit biases, because certainly the training did help me understand my own biases. And as Elizabeth shared, having the hiring panel, the panel to do the short list, and having a diverse group do that does help to reduce the biases that are inherent in a meritocracy-based system, and increases the transparency and accountability. And again, the same kind of research that Harvard and Deloitte have done has shown that that will help improve diversity. I can see almost an hour in. I do want to leave time for questions. If you do have questions, you can start entering them into the chat. We have one more topic that we're going to talk about, and then we'll have time to take some questions from the audience for our panelists. So our last topic is on taking action on diversity. So the question is, how do we get to action on diversity, especially at the senior leadership in our organizations? Mark, can you start us off on that conversation?
That'll teach me to look at the chat.
Caught you, sorry.
So can you just repeat that again, Leanne?
Sure, Mark. I'm sorry, and I was looking at my notes and not at yourself, so I apologize for that. So how do we get to action on diversity, especially at the senior leadership level of our organization?
I think that, I mean, obviously, there has to be a desire to get there at the senior leader level. And if they haven't reached that point of understanding how absolutely important it is to their organization, that has to be the starting point. I do find that there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of leaders who are going down this path, but they don't know what to do. And so it seems to be, they've made the decision that this is important to their organization, and now they have to figure out the way forward. And I mean, with some certain amount of bias, I mean, the organization that I chair, the Winsett Center, Canadian Center for Women in Science, Engineering, Trades and Technology, it's a focus for us to help organizations understand where they're at and what they need to do to move forward, kind of coming up with those strategies that will help them change the organization. So I think it's a combination of, again, going back to some of the things that Brent and Elizabeth were saying. You've got a vision of what you want. You've got to, you develop a strategies to get you there by assessing where you are and what it's going to take to get you to that vision. You start measuring, and all of those things combined, there's nothing like saying this is what we're going to achieve. And I think the 30 by 30 goal is a good example of that. It has gotten all of the engineering associations and a lot of the profession focused on that goal. And I think if you put a goal in place and you start to get people excited about it, you can make change. But it isn't just, you've got to stop talking and you've got to start putting in place some actions.
And that's so very true, Marg. And I've been working on diversity initiatives for my whole career, but one of the most exciting things I've done recently is working with the diversity committee within my organization and establishing that vision and mission statement for diversity and inclusion. So yes, I totally agree with you. It is the starting point for equity, diversity, and inclusion. Thank you, Mark. Brent, what do you think? How do we get to action on diversity?
I think I think it's important to some of the things we previously said, about getting the senior leadership to initiate, to buy in, and especially in large organizations like mine. But not just buy in, but see the value, like truly see the value in having a diverse workplace. I was fortunate enough to be in a webinar recently on this topic, and the company that presented had an acronym called KEEP, which I'm going to shamelessly steal, but it was called, I just lost it there. It was called Knowledge, Empathy, Engagement equals Potential and Performance. So when you think about getting that action of if everybody has the knowledge and are engaged and empowered to make those changes, we will see the potential and performance, I think, is the thinking there. So that kind of stuck with me, and that was, you know, that it's not any, you can write down plans, actions, again, they're only as good as the execution and the follow through. So if more people understand that and know about it, not just having an action plan, but truly have it as an intrinsic value, then I think the potential and the performance will shine through.
Thanks, Brent. And as you said earlier, I think it does, as you say, start with leaders, start with having champions and allies who are examples of, demonstrate the examples of equity, diversity and inclusion. So thank you. Elizabeth, what do you think? How do we get action on diversity?
Well, absolutely, it does need to be truly led from the top, and there needs to be a strong commitment. It really needs to be part of your you know, your ESG statement as an organization. Your board needs to have time to talk about it, your executive committees, and then down through that. I think it's kind of so one of my mentors once said to me, it's kind of like, you have to think of it like safety. You know, and if you go to a mine site or you go to somewhere, a construction site, the first thing you do is you work out what your safety share, you know, and you go through that every single time. And that is how organizations have driven safety through their culture. They've made it front and center, the first thing that they do. And I think it's also really important, you know, we make it very important to recognize Indigenous unceded right and title in every conversation that we have. And we bring that to the forefront because that is very important to us, and we want people to remember it and think about it and discuss it. I also think diversity and inclusion in its broadest sense is something that we do need to talk about regularly, on a regular basis, that this should just be not a thing that we want to edge around or not, try to pretend it doesn't exist, but we need to embrace it, because we know that, like safety, like engaging with our, with the traditional owners of the land, and this is the same thing, it makes us better. And so if we can come from it from that perspective, that everybody has something to contribute and to learn, that is not about judging, well, you haven't been good, but that actually we have an opportunity to make a difference that will make our organization so much better, and everyone can contribute to it, because it's really critical that this, that gender diversity, that inclusion more broadly, LGBTIQ plus, right? That's not to be fixed by that group. That is to be fixed by, that the inclusion is not the responsibility of that group. The inclusion is the responsibility of the majority group, of the leadership group, that it is their job to make sure that inclusion happens. Now, of course, with any group, it's nothing about us without us. We need to be represented, but the work should not be on the minority group. The work needs to be done by the leadership, by the majority group, by everybody, because as we see, when we put these policies in place, when we make our organization better, everybody benefits. And that's the beauty of the whole thing.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And your passion on this really shines through, and it gets me so excited. But I think coming away from this, I think, as Mark said, so important to start with a vision, mission, and goals. And as you have all said, having our leadership embrace it, demonstrate their commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is so important. And then to talk about it, to make it part of our conversations every day, to look at what we do from a recruitment standpoint, from an advancement, from a recognition standpoint, to look at it through the diversity and inclusion lens, to look at it through the equity lens will help improve our organizations. This has been so exciting. I know we can talk for much longer. I did say that we would leave time for questions. I see we have about 20 minutes for questions, and we have a long list of questions. I'm just gonna go through them in order, so I apologize if I'm not curating this. So I'll start with Susan Davidson's question. Hi, Susan, good to see you virtually. And Susan asked, can the panel provide a list of the references for the research cited? So Elizabeth has some research, and I think Marg mentioned some. I mentioned some papers that I have read. So what we'll do is we will organize all those different references and provide them to CAE, who will send it back, or OSPE. It might come from OSPE, Anne-Marie, who will send it out to our attendees. Okay. So thanks, Susan. Great question. Jim, nice to see you, Jim. Jim asks, what can universities do to prepare their graduates for a workplace that is not necessarily welcoming of diversity? Great question. Elizabeth, do you mind starting with that question?
Sure. I think one of the things that we need to do is to empower our graduates, because they are highly capable, valuable, and smart young people. So one of the things that I have always sort of said to graduates is choose, right? Choose where you want to work. And if you do not see the organization aligning with your values, you have a better places you can go. And so I think that things like workplace experiences, internships are very important, because they allow students to sort of experience and think about what kind of workplace they want to work in, and then to come back to the university and reflect not only on the learnings from practice, but also their learnings of that workplace experience. But you know, it's still going on at UBC. I think we do the salary seminar, or we used to do the salary seminar. I know Cheryl Staub-French is carrying on, but that's a discussion with students. It used to start just with women, but actually everybody wanted to come, so that's great. Where we talk about negotiation, and the thing that's really important is, it's not just about compensation. It's about, you're going to spend a lot of hours, your waking hours there, the majority of your waking hours there. So make sure that's in an organization, where you're aligned with the values of that, because not only are they interviewing you, but you are interviewing them. Do you want to give them your time and ideas and work in return for money? So it's both ways. So I'm very much about educating our students about their value and their agency.
I totally agree, and what I've seen at UBC, because both my daughter went to UBC, she was in the business faculty, and my son's currently there in the engineering faculty. But what we've seen in both faculties is there are courses on diversity, and certainly from my standpoint, they should be mandatory courses, because whether it be in engineering or where my daughter is in finance, there are problems with the lack of women in finance, as well as the lack of women in engineering. So certainly diversity training at the university level, unconscious bias training, I think is necessary as well. Brent, you spoke to having children at the university level. What have you seen that universities have done to prepare their graduates for the workplace, or what would you recommend?
So it's funny, my observation with my own children, one is graduated, one is in university, and another one is just starting, is they have developed this notion of equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout their schooling. It's nothing that they've been taught. So when you think of it from that aspect, they have that culture, that mindset as it is, or I find, just judging by, people they know and talk about and whatnot. It just seems to be ingrained in today's education system. So I think that the training that may need to take place is how to, I think, to the question, is the people that are necessarily not welcoming of that thinking. And so it's getting them used to, or providing them tools to be able to adapt, to educate the workforce that they're joining, not to be preachy about it, but just to come in and say, here's a different way of looking at things, and maybe we should be a little more inclusive or diverse in our work group. So I don't think it's so much as preparing the graduates, my own experience. It's more preparing them to get ready, that the world is not there yet, I'll say. And they may be with a very progressive company or workplace, but there are still pockets that don't reflect that. So just I think coping tools would be the best way to get them ready for that. Just my own.
Absolutely. And to reach out to support networks, as Marg said earlier in her conversation, that she reached out and found a network of women professionals, and certainly the networks are greater now. There's women in engineering organizations across Canada. WinSet organizes national conferences, which is where I met Marg a few years ago. And that was a game changer for my career, was meeting someone like Marg, who was an executive in her organization. And certainly on the West Coast, Women in Consulting Engineering has been, I think, a great organization for young professionals, or even more intermediate and senior professionals, aren't they, Susan, to connect with each other? Yeah. Marg, what are your thoughts about helping students prepare for a workplace that's not necessarily welcoming of diversity?
I think firstly, model what a diverse workplace looks like. Do what Elizabeth did. Make sure you have female and diverse professors that are delivering the the education, so people understand what a workplace can look like. I certainly know when I went through school, there were, the professors all looked the same, and it certainly wasn't a diverse look. And so I think that it is one of the ways that university can prepare, is model what a diverse workplace looks like. So when they get out there, they know that an organization is not offering that to them.
Thanks, Marg. Next, we have a question from Victor, who asked, should gender equality policies include some sort of compensation actions? Is there someone who wants to start the discussion?
Maybe I could kick this off,
Awesome.
Coming from if you don't mind, sorry.
Absolutely, please.
Coming from a utility Crown Corporation, we're pretty transparent about our compensation. So if you're hired at this level of engineering, there's a range, and that it's the same for everybody. I think what we need to be a little careful of is the succession and promotion piece, and making sure that that's on par, and being transparent as well. Where I think the challenge would be is in other organizations where you get into the one-on-one negotiation versus having that transparency. And I don't have any thoughts around that, because that hasn't been my experience, but I think that would be a challenge. I think in the question that's been asked is how do you address that? Because there are smaller organizations, smaller firms that get into the one-on-one negotiation. So is that fair? Is that equitable? Is it across the board? in their considerations, and I think being transparent about it. Not so much the details, but at least the process. But.
Thank you, Brent. Elizabeth, you spoke to compensation earlier in your discussion. Did you want to add to this the answer to Victor's question?
Yeah, so I have a specific example. So back around 2012, 2013, at UBC, we actually did a salary analysis of all of the professoriate. And, we analyzed by, where they were, where people were in their career. Of course, gender was one factor and a number of different factors. And we did find actually an unexplained gap in pay that couldn't be explained by anything else but gender. And we put that out. We had statisticians look at it. We made sure that the analysis was correct. And then the provost at the time addressed the gap. And so, there was a correction of pay. So that's one piece, but that's only one piece. The critical thing is to put in place the policies and the processes that prevent that from reoccurring. So what are the things that were causing that differentiation in pay? Well, is it the fact that men are being encouraged to go up for promotion and women are not being encouraged to go up for promotion? Or, we go back to the thing with MIT ages and ages ago, where men were getting more space for their labs than women, just sort of some, how, and certainly for people coming in, your initial pay actually, usually you get percentage increases on what you initially get. And so that initial pay is really important. So it's really important that we check, we measure, and we manage what we're paying people who are coming in. So we see that they are getting, equal pay. Because at that point, when they're coming, especially if they're fresh grads, we should have some kind of equal measure there. So I think it's really about taking a very data-driven approach to it first, to understand what you have and whether there is a gap. And then if there is a gap, recognize it, correct it, because okay. And then very carefully looking at what are the strategies, and it doesn't necessarily have to be women. It could be, other groups that are being disadvantaged. And I know that Victor was later on asks about, multiple diversity. That is, there are double barriers that happen there, and we need to be alive to those and talk about them and understand them and be proactive to support people, because increasing diversity will ultimately have a greater gain for our organization than any cost that we will have in addressing it.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Mark, did you want to add to the conversation?
I'm not sure that I have a lot that I would add, but I think it does come down to what we talked about before, the biases that are embedded in how we look at people. And so making sure that, the process is in place, the training's in place, the biases aren't there. And I think back to, being in a company a number of years back, and one of the managers talked about, doing a scan of, after the raises, and found that, anyone, with a name that wasn't what, was sort of in the kind of what was seen as the norm in the workplace, wasn't getting a raise, and how unfair that seemed to be. And it's, those things can be really apparent, but you have to look for them. You have to find them, and you have to make sure that people aren't judging by things that have absolutely nothing to do with someone's ability to do a job.
And that's where it's so important, as you all have mentioned, about having the policies in place and having multiple people evaluate and do a scan to make sure it makes sense. And even small organizations can do this because, of course, there's salary surveys out there that small organizations can get access to. So even if they have one type of person or a type of role, I'm sorry, in their organization, they can compare that across industries. I see it's 20 past the hour, and I did want to answer a few of the questions. And Elizabeth, you spoke to Victor's second question, which I think is an awesome question about people with multiple diversities, which and I count myself as one of them. So should a single policy cover all possible cases, or do we need a complete and complex set of rules? Marg, I see your hand raised, but I'm not sure if you're raising your hands or your hand just moved.
I was, Leanna, because I think there's a wonderful training program through what is now Women and Gender Equality, and it's called GBA Plus, Gender-Based Assessment Plus. And it's an eye-opener around exactly what Victor's talking about, that we all come to the table with a mix of things, you know, whether it's our gender, our sex, our ethnicity, the color of our skin, our religion, you know, all those things have an impact on who we are as a person. And if you set a policy and you set it for 80% of the population or whatever that number might be, you're likely to have a negative impact on some of the people because of that mix that goes into it. You know, like one size just doesn't fit all. So I think when I first heard that the government of Canada was using that to set their policies, I didn't understand it. I took the training, and it gave me an appreciation for how important it is to look at all of those facets of people.
Thanks, Mark. Elizabeth or Brent, did you want to add on to the discussion on single versus multiple policies?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, you know, exactly what Mark said, you know, there's many different places where people come from, and we all need to be able to come to work as our authentic selves and be who we are. And so policies that say we should be inclusive are the policies that we need. I would say that it would be very difficult to write a policy that addresses every single one, because we will be wrong. And so I think what we want to do is we want to learn to do better. And so I think good policies are policies that ask us to learn to do better, ask us to do training, ask us to have diversity on our panels, ask us to think broadly. Those are the ones that actually benefit and help us be more educated about what we're doing. And policies that require us to look at our data, policies that require us to measure our success are the ones that will bring up the diversity that we're missing, or bring up the challenges and the barriers that we are raising. So I think we have to be strategic, because if we just have like a rule for everything, then people will stop thinking. And I'm all about people thinking.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Brent?
Just to add a little bit to what Elizabeth said there, my own comment on that would be, when you make a complete complex set of rules, that's what it leads to is you know, a decision tree, and not the thinking, and not the setting back and observing what are we doing here, what's the right thing to do. So just, you know, I think it's important that whatever you have, that it reflects where you are, what you have. You know, I once had a project manager who was an immigrant himself, and you know, maybe his own to give everybody else an opportunity. He was hiring immigrants and gave them those opportunities. And I've often thought back to that. I mean, it was when I was a summer student, but that's an opportunity for us all to sit back and think about. Don't make it, you know, 10 rules when one could, or one clear policy that allows some thought to go into it could apply.
Great tips. Thank you, Elizabeth and Brent. I want to answer these last two questions and make a little bit of time for closing. So Susan asked us, how do we combat implicit biases that are learned at home? Do one of our panelists want to take that question? Brent, what do you think? How do we combat implicit biases learned at home?
Yeah, that's a tough one because that applies to so much in society, right? Not just not just engineering. So, you know, I quoted the example earlier of my observation of my kids going through elementary school and through high school. You know, that wasn't anything that really came from us at home. It was something in the environment they were in. Certainly we've encouraged that. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer how you combat that, but I guess it comes back to what we said before about preparing for the workplace. Is the workplace has to be aware of that, you know, bringing those biases in that are learned at home, and use the workplace as an education venue as well to educate people about differences.
And it's all about an openness to different perspectives, isn't it? To understand we all have biases, but to be open to different perspectives. Julia has an excellent question and probably a very good question to end our discussion is, how do we move beyond centering the business case as a reason for diversity to making it a norm in our workplaces?
Well, I agree with Julia. We are well beyond business case, and I think the demand for engineers is going to force organizations to you know, thrive or survive. This generation, the generation of our kids, the ones that you know, that are, you know, coming out of university now, they are demanding a changed workforce. And I think change will be thrust upon organizations that do not get on board. I also think that, you know, in, you know, our ESG statements as organizations also, they need to be real, right? And they will, organizations ultimately will be tested on by boards on whether they're meeting those statements. So I have a great hope. I had great hope 30 years ago. I continue to have great hope that we are moving beyond that business case because of the pressures of the Great Resignation, of the changes that have happened in our society and will continue to happen. It is a good time. I think it's just every one of us has a responsibility. If we're a leader, we have a responsibility to make change. If we are somebody in middle management, we have a responsibility to think about it. If we are in not-for-profit, or if we are a junior person, we can also, in our own environment, you know, male, female, diverse, whatever we are, we have an opportunity to make change. And I think allyship and getting sort of the dominant group to take responsibility there is going to make this change. That is going to make the engineering workforce better for everyone in the future.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm just totally inspired by you, by Marg, by Brent. I would love to continue the conversation, but that is all the time we have today. This has been a fabulous forum. I love the discussion, exchanging the ideas. I encourage our attendees to continue the conversation with people in your workplaces. It's a great discussion. Reach out to us, reach out to the Canadian Academy of Engineering to further the conversation. We do have a recording that will be on the CAE website. They will let you know when it's available. So with that, on that note, on behalf of the CAE and National Engineering Month, I want to thank you for attending and participating in this webinar on our Building Gender Inclusive Workplaces. I want to thank Elizabeth, Mark, and Brent for being our panelists today and for your candid responses to all our questions. Thank you also for the important work that you're doing to advance gender inclusiveness in our professions and in our workplaces. I'd also like to thank the Ontario Society for Professional Engineers, OSPE, for organizing our National Engineering Month this year. In particular, thanks to Marissa, Messina, and Marianne for providing the technical support for today. I'd also like to thank Anne-Marie Wynn from McGill University for assisting us with organizing this panel. Lastly, I'd like to say a very special thank you to all our National Engineering Month partners who are noted on this slide. Enjoy the rest of our 2022 National Engineering Month and have a great evening. Thank you again. Good night.